Massachusetts starts reporting parents to Child Protective Services if their kids fail to log on to their mandatory online lessons. Maybe we should start requiring massive seizures of assets from teachers who can't make their students literate as payback for all that wasted taxpayer money. How about that? A little quid pro quo. How about a little this for that? I'm Dr. Duke, she's Katie, and that's damn right. This is the Latin-themed Dr. Duke Show. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Dr. Duke Show, the only program that keeps you educated on the craziness impacting K-12 classrooms and college campuses around the world. Today, we start in Massachusetts, where parents are being told that failure to attend online public school classes due to COVID could result in a call from Child Protective Services. What else do you got? Public schools are running out of answers. They don't know what to do. They don't want to go back. The teachers don't want to teach. The unions don't want the teachers to teach. The kids want to teach. The kids want to be there. The moms want to be there. Schools don't want to be there. Democrat politicians don't want to be, at least until Trump is unelected. Then maybe you watch there'll be a sea change in how dangerous COVID is if we get crazy Biden as the president. But they've run out of ideas. And so all they've got left is to be punitive. We did a story last week, a couple weeks ago, about how some school districts were lying to parents, telling them that they're not allowed to opt out of public school, that they're not allowed to homeschool. They've got to stick with it. You have other situations like this where in Massachusetts, if your kid is not online learning about social emotional learning in place of algebra, we may send a Child Protective Service agent to your home to get you with the program. When did public school become prescriptive and a kind of prison? When did it happen?
A long, long time ago.
Right, probably from the moment it was conceived.
In a galaxy far,
right?
far away.
Remember what Horace Mann said about this, right? That once we set up the public school systems, there will be no excuse for absence except sickness and death, he said. Those would be the only two things we would excuse you for. And apparently, sickness, plague, is not enough anymore. The only now that we've come, 170 years since Horace Mann? And now it's just death. If you're dead, we will consider excusing you.
That's warm fuzzies and a very nice reference there to Shakespeare. So basically what happened is there are parents in Massachusetts who talked to the Boston Globe, and they said that they were actually reported to the state's Department of Children and Families for neglect. For neglect. What do teachers do all the time? Neglect. So they were reported for neglect when the kids were absent from the remote learning sessions back in the spring. And isn't that now what we're all encouraging, that, okay, remote learning, but who is going to be excused from the remote learning versus who is going to apparently be reported to the Children and Family Services? So I guess basically, they were saying dozens of parents were interviewed, and they said that schools reported them for potential neglect because of absences without regard for the obvious difficulties of the situation. From the actual article, Massachusetts school officials have reported dozens of families to state social workers for possible neglect charges because of issues related to the children's participation in remote learning classes during the pandemic shutdown in the spring, according to interviews with parents, advocates, and reviews of documents. Now, they're saying in most cases, lawyers and family advocates said that the referrals were made solely because the students failed to log into the classes repeatedly. Most of the parents who reported were mothers, and several did not have any previous involvement with social services.
Right, so you're just making up a reason to investigate kids' homes. And let's talk about the word neglect. Katie brought this up. Let's talk about neglect. What are the consequences? This goes back to my teaser at the beginning, since we're in Boston. My teaser at the beginning of the show. What is the consequence for neglect? When public school teachers neglect to show up, when they neglect to go back to school, even though the state has decided it's okay for them to go back, when they do sick call-ins, when they boycott, when they walk out for reasons that have nothing to do with education. Where's the consequences for neglect? When they neglect to teach your kids math literacy, when your kids are graduating from high school with an 8th grade, 9th grade knowledge of math instead of a high school college-ready math program, when they don't read books anymore, when we neglect to have your kids read actual books from kindergarten through high school and have them instead read snippets of books and excerpts of books. Where's the consequence for that neglect? How about the fact that the public schools neglect the will of the parents in teaching them radical elementary school transgenderism, neglect the will of the local communities, neglect the will of the local religious traditions. When the public schools completely neglect every aspect of the recognition that parents pay your salary, that you are a public school means you belong to us. You don't belong to the unions. You don't belong to your politics. You don't belong to the radical education departments in college that spawned you. You belong to the public. What about all that neglect? Maybe it is time. Maybe for every kid that can't read, somebody comes to your house from Child Protective Services because you're not giving the kids what you promised you would, and takes away your blender, takes away your electric shaver, right? Oh, 8th grade kid only doing 6th grade math. We're going to take away the kitchen sink. Oh, gosh. 11th grader doing 7th grade reading. Time to take away the car, right? Let's do that. You can send your goon squads, because we're not logging on to your ineffective online teaching methods, and we'll send collection agents to take back what we gave you for false pretenses.
In one case, a mother of a special needs child was subjected to a 3-week investigation and a visit from a police officer after her autistic 6-year-old son jumped naked into view of the camera while another kid was participating in an online class. And of course, the Department of Children and Families told the mother, Christy Browder, that the school had reported it was an adult man. Now, if you're getting a 6-year-old boy and an adult man mixed up...
Aren't they?
They are.
Aren't the pedos of NAMBLA the new rewriters of Sex is Love at Any Age? We saw that in a show we did recently, right? According to drag queens. Remember the drag queen story hour?
Which one?
A huge huge drag queen conglomerate now is advertising by saying love knows no age.
Well, see,
right? So if you're a 60-year-old man dressed like a 35-year-old woman and you're in love with a 12-year-old boy, that's love, right? How about that kind of neglect?
Eventually, I guess they did, figure out that it wasn't a grown adult who did that, and they dropped the case. But now the daughter who was in the class doesn't want to relog in because she's afraid she's going to get in trouble. And this is what is happening with DCF. They're saying that if charges of neglect are upheld by DCF, parents could be at risk of having their kids removed from their homes. And in most cases, they found neglect after they actually do the review. But what's happening is that, according to the school districts, their reasoning, they're saying that these reports to DCF are not made solely by absences. It's what's happening, patterns of troubling behavior or circumstances observed during the online learning. Right. And so turn your camera off.
So you walk into somebody's living room on a bogus Child Protective Service call about this failure to log on, and you see, lo and behold, on the kitchen table, there's one of those Costco packs of potato chips for their lunch. Bad nutrition. You find a load of unwashed laundry, right? Oh my. You find that on the shelves, there are no books expressing transgender or alternative, kids' books expressing transgender or alternative sexualities. And the defenses keep rolling up, right? You actually have a dad home watching the kids. And we know when dads are left alone with little kids, they assault them, right? The dog. Right? Dangerous dog in the house, not on a leash. They find whatever they want to find once they get in there. And remember what Arnie Duncan, I go back to Arnie Duncan, who said Barack Obama's outgoing Department of Education czar, who gave us, among other things, Common Core. Maybe he said on his way out the door, 2016, 2015, maybe it's time we consider federal boarding schools. Places where we can take your kids away from you because you're not doing a good job, and we'll educate them ourselves in federal boarding schools. That's the next iteration of this.
So we know adults are all racist, especially those white adults. They're all racist. Even the high school, the college kids, they're racist. And now we're going all the way down to the elementary school students because they're racist too. So Gladwin Elementary in Lower Merion School District in Pennsylvania is making sure to solve this problem of their little students being racists. So they're going to make the 4th and 5th grade students read the book, Not My Idea, a book about whiteness. And it claims that white people who relate to police officers, remember that, who relate to them, or decline to watch the news, are complicit in racism. And then for the youngins, the youngest of our little children, the kindergartners and the first graders, they get to read a kid's book about racism.
So if you're a kid who doesn't watch the news, you're a racist.
Yeah.
What about if you're a kid who watches Fox News?
Ooh, the takeaway from this story for me is obvious.
the progressive left needs racism. They need it. They crave it the way a drunk craves a drink, the way Joe Biden craves coherence. They need it. What would the Democrat Party, what would the progressives be without the bogeyman of race? How much of what they've gotten, how many of these rioters would be in jail if they were rioting for anything else other than race right now? All of them.
Well, you can always insert another ism, though.
Well,
There's
they can. But race is their big stock in trade.
I mean, that is that's
the
big
major
kahuna.
one. It is. And I go back to what I said before, that what they crave, they have to have them. So when you're teaching little kids, right, that elementary school kids now, if you're white, you're racist, you're actually engaging in acts of racism, right? You're projecting, you're condemning 6 and 7 year olds to everything that's gone on in this country with regards to racial angst. Those little kids are participating in now. So you're forcing race on them, and then you're telling them that unless they see their non-white friends a certain way, they're doubly racist. So what you're doing is you're reinforcing racism. You're not getting rid of it. You're highlighting it. You're mainstreaming racism in a very serious way for children way too young to understand it, which is a whole nother kind of intellectual malfeasance. But you're doing that because not because you want to get rid of racism, but because you realize, progressives, that it is your only meaningful source of power. It seems whenever the word racism is thrown about, intelligent conservative, logical people, Republican politicians with great pedigrees, they just wilt, right? It's like throwing water on the Wicked Witch of the West. Nothing gives you shrinkage better than a cold pool or somebody calling you a racist.
Don't want that imagery. Mom Elena Fishbein, who has 2 boys, wrote to the district superintendent and the board demanding that they stop what she's calling this cultural proficiency curriculum. She said the book teaches kids not only to defy parents, but to hate themselves. To hate their parents also because they are white. By default, the kids are white and they're privileged and they're bad. The school is teaching this to little kids.
Instead of teaching blocks and nap time and colors and shapes and numbers. Now do you know why your 6th grader can't add? Because he spent 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade being told how racist he is over and over again.
I like that Fishbein also said, if you say anything that's racist according to the school or parents' definition of racism, you're out. You're called a racist. No wonder the parents don't talk.
Well, and we've said many, look at what's racist now. To ask, if you're a little white kid and you go up to an African-American kid at 7 years old and say, I like your hair, it's curly. Boom, you're a racist, right? If you make any observation whatsoever, think about all the microaggressions we've invented for high school and middle school and college kids. Now, how does a 7-year-old avoid a microaggression? How is it possible? They notice things about each other, right? Little kids notice difference. That, by definition, is racism. And so they've got you coming or going. See what power this gives them? By perpetrating racism, by promoting racism, by fostering racism, by demanding racism in your kids' curriculum, by demanding it, they gain more and more power, right? There's only one way to break this. This is to stop engaging in race baiting. But race baiting is so look at how you can be Jesse Jackson. You can be these race baiters. You can be Al Sharpton. You can literally have championed the burning down of a Jewish fashion mart. You literally could have, speaking of framing cops, you literally can, to get a number of cops this close to being sent to jail for the rest of their life for a completely made up rape. And because you're a black race hustler, you get a seat on CNN, you get to be one of Biden's advisors, you get to be somebody helps pick the vice president. That's what you get when you're a race baiter. So why would people stop doing it?
And according to either principal or the district spokeswoman, who do you want to hear from? They're both good.
Give me the spokeswoman.
District response from spokeswoman Amy Buckman said the district wanted an anti-racist curriculum for students and insisted on appropriate books that raise awareness of the very real issues of racism and privilege.
So an anti-racist curriculum is one that makes everything about race. That's racist.
Could it be? Is it true? Do we sort of have a maybe positive story to end with? We do. So a psychiatrist named Elizabeth Pinsky, she's actually a pediatrician, a child psychiatrist, and a parent. And she wrote for The Atlantic an article entitled, "We Flattened the Curve. Our Kids Belong in School." Now, she discussed her experience in Boston. It's like a Boston theme. today, where her kid's school has been closed. You know, obviously all schools pretty much have been closed. So they're continuing to be closed for in-person learning. And despite their entire state in Massachusetts for testing COVID-19 positive at just 2%, still remain closed. So she says, she lays out basically a line of questioning that anyone who has any sort of a brain has been asking for months now. She says, why do communities trust health experts when they urge the public to wear masks and stay home, but not when they call for sending children back to school? Why did everyone do so much work in April and May if our youngest citizens, whose vulnerability to threats other than the coronavirus is so great, can't reap the benefits in the fall?
That's well said. I wonder if she's related to Drew Pinsky, the Dr. Drew. I doubt it.
Look it up.
I doubt it, but he's also obviously a child, in many ways, a social, psychological individual, the Dr. Drew show. But yeah, I think this is right. She makes a great point here that people don't want to hear. The psychological state of children is very perilous, right? Children, the younger you go, the more suggestible they are, the less critical thinking they are. The little minds haven't developed yet. They're not abstract thinkers. So in a way, what we're doing is torturing kids. You torture them when you bring them to school and then immediately set about brainwashing them in really wicked ways. Or when you divorce themselves from the community that they've known like this, and you shut them up, right? And you scare them by default, where their teachers are terrified and politicizing this to such a degree that all that does is it reaps greater psychological distress on the children themselves. There's a reason why childhood suicides and attempted suicides are at a record high now. It's that way because of all of the psychological stress. You are, in other words, I think she's trying to say this, she's pointing this out, Elizabeth Pinsky, you are using the COVID virus as a tool of psyops, as a psychological tool to not just demoralize voters or demoralize taxpayers, but to demoralize, or Trump supporters, but to demoralize little children. And as I've said so many times, they're the last thing you think about at the public schools. Good that psychiatrist Pinsky is thinking of them.
Yeah, and she says as a pediatrician, she began seeing more kids struggling with the mental health issues side of it. She says children with disabilities who depend on specialized schools for services came to the emergency room with aggressive behaviors too dangerous to be managed at home. Other children showed escalating symptoms of anxiety and depression. Suddenly, pediatricians and child psychiatrists were noting many more eating disorders. I saw very young children who were having suicidal thoughts and adolescents who had acted on such impulses and nearly succeeded.
Sure, 12 years ago when we started Common Core, we warned you that Common Core was doing this to little kids, right? We had a psychiatrist named Mary in New York Mary Calamia, became very famous. She gave a legendary rant that 12 years ago, Common Core was driving more and more kids to her professional practice because it wasn't learning. It's not math by numbers, it's math by words, right? It's sociological math. It was really short-circuiting kids' minds. Don't those seem innocent days now? That 12 years ago, what an innocent, kids were only upset about what was going on with math class. What was going on in the reading and math class. Fast forward 12 years, now look what these kids are stressed out with. The entire system of American education almost seems now geared towards breaking children so you can reprogram them.
But because we've taught them, indoctrinated them so well to think that it's not what's actually happening, but it's always stemmed back to that racism, sexism, homophobia, all of that, they will not take a look at what's actually happened. The real reason this is, they'll take the fake. The bait.
And a classic example of this is it's now verboten to suggest that maybe the problem for many African Americans is African American culture, right? Homelessness with fathers. There's so many reasons, we saw a great interview. A number of great interviews have been done by kids on campus too. If you watch the latest Louder with Crowder segment from Austin, he actually sits down with a biracial young woman who says exactly that. We're asking the wrong questions, she says. Why is my community is not dysfunctional, broke, unemployed, and violent and criminal because of something white people did 200 years ago? That's not the reason. Where are the fathers? Why aren't families together? Why are people who live in these communities so oftentimes uninterested in preserving them or maintaining them? These are fair questions to ask, the African American young woman asked, but the idea that we would ever suggest in a school setting that people can be responsible for their own behavior is long gone.
It's time for some real education. The stone spheres of Costa Rica consist of more than 300 petrospheres on the Dicas Delta and on Isla del Caño. Locally, they are also known as bolas de piedra, literally stone balls. The spheres are commonly attributed to the extinct Dicas culture, and they are sometimes referred to as the Dicas spheres. They are the best-known stone sculptures of the Istmo-Colombian area. In June of 2014, the pre-Columbian chiefdom settlements with stone spheres of the Dicas was added to the UNESCO list of World Heritage Sites.
Other than the fact that once the United Nations is looking after you, you're in big trouble, this is kind of a neat story, right? I mean, we've got these, they call them basically las bolas, the locals, the Costa Ricans, the balls, right? And they're this primitive culture, pre-Columbian, and they fashion these huge, sometimes small, sometimes huge balls of stone. Take a look at some of them. And some of them actually have had or have been reputed to have gold inside them at the very core of them. And so they're about 1,000 years old, again, pre-Columbian, by about 500 years, 1,000 years old, carved with magic potions and symbols on them, perfectly spherical and filled with gold. It may sound far-fetched, but they're all over so far 300 of these have been found in Costa Rica. Keep looking at some of those images there. To date, over 300 stones have been found in the Dicas Delta, and the Dicas Delta is named for the now extinct Dicas culture that used to inhabit that region. Some of the spheres are made from sandstone or limestone, about a dozen spheres each. The rest of the 300 known are all made and sculpted from gabbro, all common rocks in the region. Gabbro is an igneous rock that is chemically similar to something like basalt, but instead of cooling at the surface due to volcanic eruption, gabbro is plutonic, meaning it cools from magma into rock while still in the Earth's crust. The idea of giant ancient stone spheres first entered our popular culture in the Indiana Jones film, The Raiders of the Lost Ark. Yes, that's right. One of Las Bolas, right, is that big stone that comes running down the ramp. Now, of course, that's a completely Hollywood cultural appropriation. That really is in many people's imagination what we think of when we think of these interesting stone spheres of Costa Rica.
All right. As always, you can follow us on Facebook and Parler. If you have any questions for us, please visit freedomproject.com/askduke and send them our way. Now, we're going to wrap things up with our fun fact of the day. Dr. Benjamin Rush is considered the father of American psychiatry. He said that mental illness is a disease of the mind when everyone said it was a possession of demons. It was also Rush who helped to reunite Thomas Jefferson and John Adams at the ends of their life, encouraging both to write to each other. And they did.
And isn't it sad that now, because they're a bunch of white men, they're all considered demons?
This is true.
It was Benjamin Rush who taught us that mental illness was something different than demonic possession. Modern progressives, they're all just demons. You seeing something? Is progressivism really regressive? And that's our show. For Freedom Project, I'm Dr. Duke. She's Katie. Till next time, stay spherical, my friends.